Hi, welcome back to The Permission Slip, a podcast for leaders, creators, and entrepreneurs ready to align their multi-passionate purpose into a magnetic presence. These episodes are recorded live in my free Facebook community, The 10th House. If you would like early access to recordings and also to hop on that live stream, feel free to join in the link below. Make sure when you're filling out your submission questions to mention that the podcast sent you. All right, let's get into today's episode. Hi, welcome to this week's episode. We're going to be talking all about how to build your personal brand and the first steps that you should take. Now, it is on my goal for 2025 to build my personal brand. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a peek behind the curtain to show you the approach that I am taking and also kind of highlight ways that a personal brand sort of differs from the brand that you're building for a business. And so I guess to start, it would probably make sense to just sort of outline like what a personal brand is. And essentially, a personal brand is just how you as a person wants to be remembered. You're essentially building your reputation. But it's an intentional process. There's going to be parts of your personal brand, just like any brand, that just happen, that are unintentional. It could be from actions you take that just spontaneously occur, or it could even be from other people's perceptions of you. So you can't 100% control every single part of your personal brand. But what we can do is we can essentially cultivate a vibe that we wish to be known for and also figure out how we want to position ourselves as a professional person in the world. So to start, like I said, I want to talk about the difference between creating a personal brand and creating a brand for a business, because in my brain, it's not that I didn't realize there's differences, but it was actually through a conversation with a client of mine that I realized there are some key things in terms of how you approach developing both of them that aren't exactly the same. The first being, when you are creating your business brand, your ideal buyer, your audience, that is everything. That dictates every single part of especially the visual identity of the colors you use, the fonts you're using, because you're trying to communicate very clearly to that person what your business is about in hopes to gain either a following, a community, or business or sales. So when it comes to crafting your brand, it is intentional in capturing that ideal buyer's attention. That is not the same for a personal brand, because in a personal brand, and I'll kind of round back to this point at the end, is that you don't have to become a business in a personal brand. It is simply the reputation you are building. And so that being said, we're not necessarily tailoring this to an ideal buyer or to a audience of sorts. The audience is going to find and be attracted to us. We are at the center of a personal brand. However, because we're building reputation is a two-way street. Like I mentioned, it is not just our actions and intentions, but it's also how they are received by others. So we still do need to take into account other people and how they respond and react to our personal brand. And we want to make sure that we are cultivating and tweaking and making sure it's as authentic and aligned with our goals and what we actually want to convey through our personal brand. But we don't have to build everything around a buyer as much as we do in a business brand. I definitely think a good litmus test to take when it comes to building the personal brand and trying to create that reputation piece is to sort of ask yourself, why should someone care? And not in a way to discredit your ideas or beliefs, but instead build a case around that question. And that's going to make sort of the bridge between a person or the audience and yourself a little bit more clear. And in my kind of the framework that I'm following, I it all builds that bridge for you. But that's just one thing to ask is why should someone care? And you could also ask that in a business too. But that being said, because in a personal brand you're centering yourself, you can actually start with your visual identity, with your visual vibe. When you are building a business brand, the visual part is the last part you should really think deeply about developing. When you're first starting a business, you do need to get a logo and colors, and you need some sort of online or public presence. But often, as a business grows and shifts and evolves, it typically needs a refresh. I just finished a logo for a new client recently, and they were in this exact boat. They had started their business 4 years ago, and they had just got to the point where they wanted to uplift and up level the look of their brand. They knew that it wasn't their business wasn't the same as when it started. It had shifted, it had matured, and they felt like they have shifted and matured as well through the process. So the visual identity piece is something that is entirely informed by your audience and also by the foundational branding stuff of the ideal buyer, which is part of the foundational brand, as well as like your mission, your vision, your values. So all of those things determine what your visual identity is in a business brand. But that's not necessarily the same in a personal brand. You can start immediately with the visual side of things. And as you start to build your inner city, which I will talk about in this video what that means, you might make tweaks along the way to that. But visual branding can certainly come before the core foundational branding things. And then also, like I mentioned before, a business brand exists to further the business, and that is obviously making profits and being alive. But it doesn't all have to be that, but that is part of running a business. Whereas a personal brand, you do not have to profit off of it. You can use, or I guess you don't have to like sell something yourself. You can utilize your personal brand to build better business connections. I know this is going live in my 10th house group. And so those people are entrepreneurs who are running their own business. So their personal brand is going to help fortify and strengthen that business. But if you're a career professional who isn't really interested in starting your own venture, but instead you want to work in really aligned companies and industries, maybe you're making a career pivot or shift, or you just want to emerge as being a leader in your industry, you can do all of that without also having to sell something. I think of some of our most notable personal brands that do this as sort of like political leaders or thought leaders. A lot of times, yes, they are authors, but you can tell that's not like the core of what they're doing. One of the people that immediately comes to mind, I don't know why, is Noam Chomsky. Like he's not like hawking you, a course or his herbal tea. He's not really selling products. He does have books or whatever, but it's not exactly like that's not the core of his personal brand. His personal brand is to push his beliefs and push his findings and research and thoughts. And so, that being said, as well, the brand for a business exists regardless of who is operating or hired or running that said business. Now, if a business gets bought out, sometimes that does come with a brand refresh as new people get their hands in it. But typically, a business brand exists regardless of who the employees are, regardless of who's running the show, regardless of if the founder's still involved or not. It should still stay strong, unless it gets to a point where it wants to pivot in a new direction. But that being said, a personal brand is going to follow you wherever you go. So you are what's tying the personal brand down. And I think it is important to establish too, if you're somebody who does have their own business, your personal brand and your business brand are not the same thing. They can be really strongly intertwined. They can be loosely intertwined, or they cannot really be crossed over much at all. I feel like if you're building a personal brand and you have a business, there should definitely be some sort of overlap there, unless you're trying to like sell that business and distance yourself from it. But your personal brand is kind of like a part of the business, but it's not the whole thing, and your business has its own entity. There's some people who have a really, really strong overlap between the two. Martha's Store is one of them. Her businesses, her lifestyle, content, her blog, her magazine, her books back in the day, her TV show, all had her name and her face all over it, but at the same time, it was its own business entity. Somebody who has a little bit of a looser overlap between the two is, I think, immediately of Jones Road Beauty. I have never bought from this brand, but I see their ads all the time on Facebook. And the company was started by Bobbi Brown, who is a makeup artist. And Bobbi Brown actually has her own makeup line with her name on it, Bobbi Brown, on the packaging, on everything. But she also started Jones Road Beauty in the past couple years. And obviously, just the fact that it doesn't share her name is enough to show like the overlapping is a little bit less. But however, it's still very much there because she shows up in a lot of their marketing. In those ads that I see on Facebook, I usually see Bobbi Brown in them explaining why she created the product, explaining what she's doing with it. So that's a little bit of a looser overlap, but it's still certainly present that her personal brand as a renowned and trusted makeup artist is propelling this business forward. But it's not as synonymous as her makeup line that shares her actual literal name. So those are kind of the big differences between your business and your personal brand. Now I want to get into the steps that I'm taking to sort of like organize this and to cultivate. To me, creating my personal brand is very much like cultivating the vibe, right? Like I mentioned, this is all about the reputation you're trying to craft, and also like what goals are you trying to achieve with your personal brand? Are they to extend your business? Are they to extend career growth and development? Is it simply to feel more connected in your community? Is it to emerge as a thought leader? There's a lot of different reasons for us to create a brand. So let me just start there. Identifying your goals. What exactly do you want to build, and what spaces do you want to show up in? Somebody, for example, who wants to create a nonfiction book, who wants to create some sort of maybe self-help book, or really want to establish themselves as being a voice in their industry, they should be emerging as a thought leader, versus maybe somebody else who wants to be known for like their hosting skills and for throwing like really great parties. Maybe that aligns with the business they have. They should focus on creating visual content and leveraging things like Pinterest, versus the person who wants to emerge as a thought leader should maybe be on platforms that allow them to like be very text-based, like Threads or X or Blue Sky. Those are places where the thought leader really emerges strong. For example, when I was younger, I really I thought it would be so cool to be the person that is like quoted in a magazine, as like seen as the expert, or like in a documentary, or VH1 had those I love the 2000s or I love the 90s series. And I was like, I want to be that person that they like the talking head they pull on to be like an expert or to be a commentator on something like that. To me, would just be like really cool to do. So as I'm cultivating my personal brand, that to me is the goal, is to be that person. So I need to emerge as a thought leader in my field, or as somebody who has something to say. And so obviously magazines aren't really what they used to be. They're certainly still floating around, but they're not what they were at one point. And documentaries, are a lot bigger. I mean, some of them are more accessible, but I'm thinking like, where are sort of like the more accessible lower levels of those kind of things? And that's obviously podcasts and guesting on podcasts, guesting on blog posts, guesting in other people's content. That's sort of like a quick way to have that, or to show up, I guess, as the authority that I wish to be. So that's sort of like my goal. And for me, a goal doesn't really mean anything unless I have some sort of core value or core why driving behind that. I don't know why I am this way, but I cannot set arbitrary goals, and that's why I struggle so much with long-term planning, because I come back to this point where I'm like, what's the point of all this? Like, why am I trying to do it? Um, and so, rooting into core values and using core values to build branding is what I have taken all of my clients through for their businesses, but it really strongly applies for personal branding as well. I think if you're trying to create a really strong and connected audience and community, if you are trying to create something that feels ethical and, I don't want to say like authentic because it's such an overdone word, but something that like truly feels real and rooted and trusted. And like I mentioned, ethical. You have to be leading from a place of strong values. And that's how you're going to attract people who vibe with you. Like I say, it's the girlies who get it. That's because they resonate with some sort of value that you have as well. And that's why we watch and we consume content from people on social media, because we share their core values and their, even, and it doesn't even have to be blatant. It doesn't have to be like you start every video or every piece of content with I value XYZ, but it should be this kind of like silent undercurrent that is flowing through all of the things you create, and everything in your brand should touch back to the value part. I was having a conversation with a client about people that she admired on social media, and she was kind of saying to herself, you know, why can't I be as bold and brash as this creator who very openly shares her political beliefs and is very openly like, if you're not on the same page, get the fuck off of my page, you know, if you don't vibe with these things. And so to be that open and to be that bold and brash attracts her immensely to this character because they have that shared value. But at the same time, she was kind of like, why can't I do something like that? Or why does that seem so like absurd for me? And I kind of feel the same way. Like, I definitely have strong political beliefs, but they aren't like one of the top core values that I've assigned myself. And so, that being said, there is sort of like, I don't want to say like a ranking of the values, but there can be things that you value in your personal life that maybe just doesn't come through as loud and clear in the personal brand. And that's not to say that you're hiding them, but it's definitely more of like a subtler undercurrent based off the other things. And when I think about values too, I feel like they exist in harmony, not in balance. There tends to be a lot of talk about balancing, equilibrium, and as somebody who's not crazy about binaries, that to me is an extension of a binary, equilibrium and balance. So I'm not really crazy about either of those things either. However, harmony to me is different, and this roots back to my music education. So if you didn't know, I went to school for audio engineering and music. That's what I majored in. Very random, but in that we learned a lot about, you know, how sound is created, how music works at a very like scientific and like technical level, as well as like the philosophical side of things. And part of that is the structuring of harmonics, my goodness, and how like certain chords sound good together because of their harmonic structure. And to me, harmony is taking in the low notes, taking in the low vibrations, taking in the high vibrations, creating a stacking of them, and figuring out what pairs really well so you have a beautiful melody, so you have a beautiful chord structure, or an evocative chord structure. It doesn't even have to be beautiful, but it just, the music can convey certain emotions and feelings in people, and that's all due to the harmony, due to the chord structure and the melody that sits on top of it. I don't know how I really arrived to this place, but that's how I view values. Is there might be some notes or parts of a chord structure of your value structure that maybe aren't so loud and clear. You know, it's not the melody playing on top. However, they do frame all of your other values. And without them, you would notice a difference. It wouldn't feel as full and robust. So, creating core values, even if like I mentioned, like the political thing, even if that's not something that you want people to know top first and foremost, because it's a part of you, it's going to inform everything else about you. Same with like those really strong values, it's going to inform the lower ones too. So for me, core values, my number one core value, and I definitely think that you should identify sort of like what is your top, or what's like the most umbrella term for your value system. I actually went to AI to help figure this out because I knew in an abstract, like I could explain it and I knew like these are the things that I stand strong on. And I just asked it to kind of like help me figure out like what that umbrella term was. And so for me, that's authentic agency. And what authentic agency is, it's knowing who you are, developing strategies that amplify your unique voice, moving intentionally in that flow, and doing it in a way that comes from your source and not seeking external validation or external permission to live. It is simply to live for oneself or in one's best interest, and honoring that while we make strategic choices forward in our lives, like using that as our compass. So, authentic agency is why I do my branding work, because it's not so much, and this is what like my conversation with Claude AI really helped me understand, because I was explaining, you know, why I come to my work, and the whole sort of like value structures, and what I'm doing all of this for. And it was like, oh, like you want to help spiritual entrepreneurs build their brand so they can make change in the world and make better going outwards. And I was like, not really. Like I think it like that's a great byproduct of the work that I do, is the fact that I help prepare really good fucking people create really good fucking work, and actually take their gifts and help others. Like, to me, that's a byproduct. That's not like the core reason of what I'm doing. Um, the core reason is I just love to be a cheerleader. I love to see people really align with their purpose, really own who they are, show up authentically, and make decisions for themselves every step of the way that aligns them closer to their core purpose and drive. And that is authentic agency. And that's different than I'm doing this work to help create greater change in the world. I'm doing this work to help create greater change in you so you can create your world, if that makes sense. Um, so, yeah, I would suggest maybe I think I'll wrap into this in another video about how maybe to get to these core values, um, and how to like, if you're interested, using AI to sort of come up with an umbrella term. But what's so great about this, like I mentioned, everything about you is informing something else, especially when it comes to values. So authentic agency is not something that I necessarily have to center or work really hard to center. It just naturally is there. And so it is up to me, now that I know that's my core value, is just to like strengthen the bond of it, or make it a little bit more transparent. So it's not just working subconsciously, now it's conscious, now it's in the forward. So that's pretty much all creating core values is doing. You know, all of these things, especially when it comes to a personal brand, they already exist within you, but it's really just making them conscious and making them intentional in the choices you make. Naturally, the content I create, the things I talk about, the offers I craft are going to be an extension of that core value. And then I just want to make sure that it's intentional, or I can sort of like trace the threads, if that makes sense. What do we want to talk about next? So I talked about identifying goals and drive, figuring out like what all this is for, where we're leading, what we actually want to accomplish. Then I just went on a long tangent about core values. Now I want to go through a super easy first step. And I should mention too, in all of this framework that I'm going through, I don't think there's a specific order you need to do it. I think there's going to be parts of it that are just more accessible and easier to do because there are already things that like you're more conscious of, where other things might be a little bit more of a shadow work process or might take a little bit more playing around with to fully develop. But this is kind of like start in the places that make the most sense and sort of like fortify and work on the rest. So the easiest place that I think to start, not to start, but to immediately implement, is creating a signature vibe. This is so important because in brand, one of the strongest pillars you want to lean on is reputation is repetition, or repetition is reputation. What you're consistently putting out there is how people are going to know you. And so by being more repetitive, you're actually helping build and solidify your brand. Oh, I feel like I have a hair in my mouth. Okay, I think I'm good. So that being said, there's a few no-brainer ways that you can create repetition that are entirely visual. And this is why I mentioned earlier, you can put the visual branding side first when creating your personal brand, because this is a super easy way to create repetition. One of the most simple things is to just choose a color that's gonna be your color. For me, it's red. I don't know if you've noticed, but in everything that I do, there tends to be this really bright red involved. It's on my lips right now. It's all over my website. And of course, I use different colors. Like the 10th house colors and branding look different from my business big magic, those colors and brandings, but there is that shared tone of red, or they sort of like the color palettes really complement each other. I know a lot of creators do this. You know, look at the people that you view as iconic and try to pick up what is their color. I know Captolia, who is another like brand witchy vibe. I featured her a couple times on here. Her color is like this, it's purple, but it tends to be like the brighter iridescent amethyst, like electric lavender type of purple. Tori Dunlap, who is a financial feminist, I mentioned down here too. She has this like iconic berry red lipstick that she wears in pretty much all of her content, or she like especially did this when she was building momentum. That color is all over everything she does. I think it's literally on her book cover as well. It's like either surrounding the text or it's the color of the text is this berry shade that she uses for everything. That's intentional. And that brings me into another way that you can bring on a signature vibe, and that is with your clothing choices and your styling choices. For me, red lipstick, I try to wear it as much as I can in these videos. My little gold hoops, my bobbed hair, and leopard print. I don't always wear leopard print in every video. I probably could if I tried hard enough. But leopard print, I mean, I literally have my journal right here. I have my phone background right here. For a long time, my wallet was leopard print. I switched that out. I should honestly make, how does this work? That banner right there. I should get that to be leopard print too. But I have leopard print everywhere because I personally like it. And when I notice like I love this and I want this to be my signature just for selfish reasons, not even for my personal brand, I obviously pulled that into my personal brand that I'm creating. I'm like, yeah, like leopard print is obviously a part of it. My red lipstick is a part of it. My general vibe is a part of it. So for some of us, this is going to be really easy. We're just going to exemplify. Is that the word? Is it exemplifying? No. It's, oh, what is that word? It's like exemplify, but it's not. I don't know. We're just going to be blowing up these parts of ourselves that we already instinctively have, that are already part of it. For some people, it might be their glasses. Like I mentioned, Tori Dunlap, she did a lipstick thing too. it was a certain shade she'd wear. So anything in that vein of something that you already is a part of you, just make sure that it's consistent through everything you create. Maybe link it back to that signature color if you could. Another way to approach this, if you don't have something that's obvious like I do, kind of like think of it as like you're creating a character. You know, when you picture your personal brand, you know, what does that person look like? What are they wearing? How do they dress? Are they super comfy and casual? Or are they more like put together and buttoned up? You know, those little things. And just make sure that every time that you show up, your profile pictures, you know, that all matches your clothing and styling choices. Another place that you can go is more on outside of like our personal body and self is fonts, images, logos. Do some mood boarding, get together sort of like a consistent vibe, create a logo that fits that if you would like. You don't have to have a logo as a personal brand, but to have like little icons or even like a signature emoji that you always use, that's another way to create another visual identifier for you. And creating, not, you don't have to build a font, oh my gosh, that is not what I mean. That'd be crazy, you have to build your own font. But like having a font that you go to, if you're somebody who posts on like Instagram stories or something, you know, always choose the same font when you type out your little stories in Canva or whatever you use the same font. One, it makes it so much quicker and easier because now you're not scrolling and searching for a font every time. But two, it also creates repetition. Catchphrases is another way to do this. I don't really think I have much of a catchphrase. I don't know, maybe I do and I just don't realize. But you, especially like YouTubers, you hear this, they'll maybe like introduce their video the same way every single time with their little opening line or a catchphrase they always say, something of that nature, a slogan. That's a really great way to create repetition. And then also creating content layouts. So this is filming from the same locations, having a similar like preset for your photography or similar colors you feature or similar scenes. The look of your email newsletter, keeping that consistent. So having these sort of like copy and paste templates, it might seem boring to you to always, like if I always film from this background or in this room, I would think that my content is all starting to look the same. That's what you want. That's the point. That's how you're creating a brand. Because to you, it looks the same. Like if you go to your page, everything's going to feel very homogenous. Great. Because now when it enters social media land, you know, you're creating an identifier that people can immediately recognize as yours in the mix, in the shuffle of all this other shit that they come across. So don't be afraid of homogeny. Don't be afraid of things looking the same. That's actually working to your benefit. Repetition is reputation. So those are just a couple ways to create or craft your signature vibe. You can do it through music too. Oh my gosh. The music that you choose to put into things or you choose to feature on your story or anything like that, you know, kind of think of like what's the energy and what's the vibe of that. Does that relate back to your core values? Does that relate back to the things that you're trying to portray? And like I mentioned, I feel like signature vibe is just one of those things you don't overthink it. Be intentional, but don't overthink, you know, like kind of know what it is you're doing and own that, but you don't have to like freak out if you don't have leopard print, you know, featured in the video, or if there was a day that I forgot red lipstick, you know, that doesn't mean that I don't post. It's not that deep, but it does go a long way. So we talked about identifying goals in Drive, rooting into your core values, creating a signature vibe. And now we got two more points here. Noticing your current brand. This is one of those things where you might feel like you don't have one. Well, guess what? If you have a social media presence, you have a brand of some sort, some way. Any relationships that you forged is a brand. Any place that you've worked is part of your brand. So just take a moment maybe to like write down all of those things. Look at all the places where you show up online, where you show up in your life. Do you volunteer at certain locations? Are you a regular customer in certain places? And just think about, what condition are those in? Are they in alignment with the city you're building? City. Again, I mentioned it. This is the last point that I'm going to make a whole video on, because this has completely changed the way that I think about content. And this could be applied to a business brand as well. But think of your brand as a city, or if you're just starting it, you can think a little bit smaller and think of it like a village, right? Is there going to be different neighborhoods that have different people, that have different vibes? You go to them for different reasons. When I think about who I am as a person and all of those things, like I said, like the things currently in my brand, where I went to school, what I went to school for, the jobs that I've worked in the past, the things that I'm naturally interested in, all of the things, write it down on a big piece of paper, type it out, like map it out. You don't even have to map it out yet, but just write it all out, because these are all the parts of you. And now you do not have to necessarily take all of these things and put them into your personal brand. But if you're somebody who's multi-passionate, chances are there's a lot of different things that you want your personal brand to be or to encompass. And so map it all out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to think about it as if we're building a city. What things live in the same neighborhood together? What are the neighborhoods that we no longer go to because they just don't have anything for us, right? That might be past jobs that we don't really want to bring any connections forward in. Or it might be like I mentioned, I went to school for audio engineering and music. Obviously that can help my current brand in certain ways, but it's not really a city that I spend a lot of time, or a neighborhood that I spend a lot of time in, but it's still a part of my city. And so, yeah, like literally lay all of this out, any certifications you've taken, experiences you've had, people you've met, and just figure out, what do these neighborhoods look like? Who visits these neighborhoods and why? What's the vibe of them? Is it like the arts district of your city? Is it like the industrial financial district of your city? What does your city look like? Does it have really tall buildings, or is it like a tiny little sleepy village? And yeah, kind of think of it like that. And the reason why this to me was so transformative is because it takes us out of ourselves and helps us actually start to build a world. And world building is very important when it comes to creating content and creating like this brand aspect of things. So instead of, I don't know, like for me, just world building is such a better approach to creating a brand than, I don't know, like a really strong it just feels more fun, I guess. Especially because like I grew up, I like to write fiction and fan fiction and all that stuff. So world building is something that I already kind of understand. So yeah, in the world, and from these neighborhoods, from these cities, I get to determine, like if that neighborhood had a newspaper, what would be written in it, and that's like my blog content, stuff like that. So you can kind of think about, what's the content that's thriving, what would they be talking about in these circles, in these spheres. I'm gonna talk about this more and talk about practical tips on how to build this in a future episode, so keep an eye out for that. But the world building aspect is truly how you build a super juicy and robust brand, something that feels multidimensional, something that feels like a Martha Stewart. You don't have to go as big and as broad as she does, but she wouldn't be able to build her all-encompassing brand where she's kind of inescapable and she's everywhere, if she didn't also build a world behind that. Trying to think of if there's anything that I've missed here. Oh yeah, I'll just talk about this in my later world building thing. So that is how I am going about crafting and starting on my personal brand. So just to review, you want to, and this is in no particular order, it's whatever makes the most sense for you. Identify goals and drive, craft your signature vibe, root into your core values, map out your city, and notice where your current brand lives. From there, any parts that maybe haven't really been developed, aren't super obvious, set goals for. Do a 2 week sprint, which I've talked about before, where you just take 2 weeks to actually develop or set a goal or really get intentional with something. So I would suggest doing a 2 week sprint for any of these things that maybe aren't aligned. Especially like for me, my first 2 week sprint is going to be identifying my goals and drive. I kind of highlighted that guesting on podcasts and blogs and content is sort of my big goal for building and establishing my brand. So that being said, I'm going to set a 2 week sprint on getting onto some podcasts. And with that, now I'm like forced to think about, okay, if I'm going to be on a podcast, I need something to talk about. I need tried and true frameworks and topics to actually bring and pitch to these podcasts. So that is going to be leaning into my city and leaning into my core values to help establish that. Anyway, I would love to know if you're thinking about building a personal brand for 2025 and like what are your goals, or do you already have a signature vibe going on? Do you already know like what your ideal color is? I should have mentioned this at the time and I forgot to make a note. Looking at your astrology chart is a really great way to help cultivate your signature vibe and to like get into your core values. I feel like looking at the chart, your birth chart, your actual birth chart, not your business's, yours, is a really, really good way to tap into branding. And that's a service that I do. So I have my Selling with Certainty business branding astrology reading, but I can take that same framework and shift it into personal brand building. It would still just be called Selling with Certainty if you want a book, but just let me know, like leave a comment below if you want me to look at your chart and help you build a personal brand using your astrology kind of as like a cheat sheet or a guide forward. But that is everything for today. This is a very long and juicy episode. I am so excited to be talking about personal branding for the month of January. Our next episode is going to be, let's see, I actually have them all mapped out. This is going to be your contradictions are actually your greatest strengths. So I'm going to be talking about the things that we feel like are at odds with each other, how that actually is the like key to building something that feels authentic and unique and just a really juicy personal brand. So that's going to be next week. Later in the month, I'm going to talk more about that like city building exercise and how to like really tap into that and start mapping that out. And yeah, I don't know. I'm really excited for 2025. I was excited for 2024 and it didn't really go as planned. So, I'm taking everything with a grain of salt, one day at a time. But Happy New Year. Thank you for watching this episode. And I will catch you in the next one.